telling a respondent they can't drive. This is, I was going to say it's where the rubber meets the road. That's a really bad joke. Punny. Typically, the kind of respondent we're talking about here would be someone who has probably needed to go to a facility or needed a higher level of care for a little while, and their family, if they have a family, has not known how to handle it. Or not wanted to handle it. Sounds like one of these touchy conservatorships. It's very, very difficult, where you have family members that do love their disabled adult, but want to maintain their spousal relationship or their parent-child relationship and boundaries. And it's just too difficult for them to say, no, Dad, I can't drive. So I've had to do this several times. And frankly, I always just blame the court.
Yep.
Just blame someone else. I mean, I don't have a good answer for it. Why can't I drive? Trying to explain to someone with dementia, well, you can't drive because remember you went to the grocery store and didn't come back for 3 days. I mean, not helpful. This is not helpful. They're not suddenly going to say, oh yeah, you know what? You're right. I think I have dementia. Maybe I need to go to an assisted living. That's not going to happen. That's what the family wants to happen, because wouldn't that be so easy? But we're not dealing with people that are in the mental place to accept that. So typically, I'll just take the keys or take the car, and then just explain, I'm so sorry. I know how difficult this is, but the judge won't let you drive. And we can go, I can set a motion and the judge will explain it to you. And what I have found is that they're angry. They're really angry about that, but they don't actually want to talk to the judge about it. And by then you can redirect, because there's other things happening in their life, that driving their car is the least of their concerns at that point. But it is very difficult. And it's also something that the family, I have found that the family is very thankful that they have had a professional conservator come in and deal with. Because it's just, I'm the conservator for a lovely 82-year-old lady who left her friend's house to go to the airport to pick up her brother, except her brother's been dead for 10 years and she ended up at a CVS, and no one stopped her from driving, because they didn't know how to tell her that she probably shouldn't drive. It's terrible. It's terrible. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and you need to make sure you show grace and allow the individual as much dignity as possible, and blame someone else.
Carl's on. We have a story. Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Well, Catherine and I actually had a case together involving somebody driving that probably shouldn't have, and drove all around Texas. And when he couldn't find his divorce attorney's office, he decided to just drive, I don't know, 500 miles away, and
That's right.
And just buy a new place to live because he couldn't figure out where to go. And then he ended up here, and we had one of the most complicated conservatorships I've ever been involved in. But in that case, his son is the conservator now, and his dad kept asking him about driving, and he had the keys, and so he said, I'm just going to sell it. I'm going to sell the car, and then if he doesn't have the car, but I've been involved in other cases as guardian ad litem or attorney ad litem, where the person, they are trying to help their spouse or family member, and they don't want to tell them, or they're going to get angry, and then they're going to scream. And so they don't do anything. And so, I remember one family member said, well, I called the cops and they said they can't do anything. And I said, you're the spouse. You have to take away the keys. You have to do this, get rid of the car. And, she was angry and violent. And I'm like, well, maybe she needs to be in a facility and not here. If you can't stop somebody from doing that and are afraid of her, then how are you going to be her conservator to do anything? So I think that part of it is a difficult discussion for whoever has to do it, and it's never easy. With regard to selling it, Teresa was correct. I did just finally get it from a family member who had the car. And I to cover my butt, asked the court when I asked for permission to sell the house and all these other things. I asked for permission to sell the car because the family has been so difficult. This is another case with Catherine that I wanted to make sure
I
the judge
guess which one.
approved it. They're all with you, Catherine, all my crazy ones, but
Sorry.
okay. I keep calling you about it. So, you know, I wanted to make sure that the court approved it. And then two of the family members this week, now that I finally have the car, have wanted to buy it, but I've sent them what the Blue Book value is, and they want to offer, one wants to offer $5,000 less, which I said no. And the other one wanted me to wait until next year for her to be able to apply for a loan then. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. Your brother needs the money now, like this. So, I had Teresa's company tow it to me because I didn't want to see this family member. And I also didn't want to drive a car I didn't know the condition in, but now I'm figuring out how to sell it and how to get a new title. So, you know, that's a new challenge. This is the first time I've had to deal with this myself. So
To get the new title, just take your letters of conservatorship to the clerk's office.
well, it says you have to have the person's driver's license and then the papers. If I don't have his license, can you still do that?
I've never had that driver's license, just the letters
I
of
received the form
conservatorship.
yesterday from the clerk's office and I was looking into that. So hopefully that works. I'll just bring the letters. Thanks.
Thanks, Shelley. Okay, ladies, my next question is in regards to family members. What is your procedure for dealing with difficult family members? Do you come up with a plan where you send them all an update every 2 weeks on Friday via email? How do you handle that? And have you come across an instance in which you had to seek court approval to limit visitation, or has the facility actually had to limit visitation due to difficult family members? I'm going to start with Catherine.
Yes, I have had this. You need to be very careful about limiting family members. Remember, it's the Campbell-Falk provision within the statute. A conservator does not have the right to restrict visitation or communication with their conservatee unless you have specific authority in your order. And to get the specific authority, you need to articulate to the court who, what, why, and when. And just cause has to be shown as to why communication has to be limited. Again, it's the Campbell-Falk Act. It comes from the Glenn Campbell line of litigation. I have limited family members. I think there's extremes. You know, there's always the extreme where you have a family member who has perhaps their own mental illness, and I think everybody has had a case like that. I think the more common part of a conservatorship and what I come across more often is when family members and other interested persons who are on the certificate of service for the original proceeding continue to be noticed throughout the course of the conservatorship. What happens is you have people who perhaps are more distant family members, but who were interested parties at the very beginning, who are now getting detailed accountings and all of the pleadings, and they now know more about this individual's life than they ever knew before. And I think I have found that that is a problem. I have one particular lady who's very successful. She was very independent. She has money. She has no children of her own, but now she has numerous, I mean, over 10 nieces and nephews and hangers on who are on these certificates of service, and they get an accounting and they are just pouring all out. They had no idea how much my conservatee had before this conservatorship, and I don't think it's right and I don't think it's fair. And then what happens is they all want to go and talk to the conservatee about it. Remember, you have a person who, whatever their disability or whatever their cognitive level, they have been found by the court to be in need of protection. And all of a sudden, you have a plethora of people who are wanting to talk to them about their personal business. So in those instances, I have asked the court to limit, and I found the courts to be very open to this, limit the topic of conversation. And then I've been able to send a letter out to everyone that says, please go and visit your relative or whoever, but do not discuss what happens in court, what my fees are, how much money they have, what they're paying for the assisted living. It's not your business. And unless I, as conservator, am doing something that I don't have court permission to do, it's not their business either. And these are vulnerable adults. Then when it comes to communicating with family members, the other sticky area I've run into is when, and it tends to be wards who are younger. So when I have younger wards, like in their 20s or 30s, that have serious mental illness problems, and they are typically, in my experience, typically from wealthier families. And here you have a very interesting dynamic where you have a family petitioning to be the conservator, but perhaps recognizing that they themselves aren't the best person to be the conservator, so they want an independent conservator. And who's paying the fees? You've got a petitioner who's paying their attorney. They are paying, I have had cases where they are paying me as the conservator, and the family member have felt that because they're paying me as the conservator, or worse, because they are paying for the conservatee to be in a very expensive mental health treatment facility, like a $20,000 to $30,000 a month treatment facility, that they have now bought access to information that my ward does not want them to have. And ethically, this is a very difficult position. I mean, I have had family members say, if you don't tell me, I will do a general, like so-and-so's doing well. They're participating in therapy. They're med compliant. I visited this week. They seem happy. The end. I've had family members say, for $30,000 a month, which is the fee to the facility, I want more than that. And what's in my ward's best interest at this point? Is it in my ward's best interest to say, well, you're not getting more than that? And if you're threatening to cut off paying for the facility, which is what they're doing, then I'm running the risk that my respondent is now indigent. And what I have done there, and Carl is on a case, one of these cases with me, what I have done there is always refer the parents or family members to their attorney. And their attorney has told them, quit asking those questions, or this isn't going to end well. But it can be very difficult, and it can be ethically challenging. And you can find yourself as the conservator very torn. Because when your ward is saying, absolutely do not communicate with my father, remember, they're not in the best place to be making these judgment decisions either, which is why they're in the facility. So
my opinion, Catherine and I have been in this exact same situation where she represented a parent and I represented the 30-some-year-old man with disabilities, and their relationship was extremely contentious. And I will tell you that my position is that it's not so ethically difficult. Sorry. I have an ethical obligation to serve as a fiduciary for the respondent, and if that is in their best interest to not be communicating any information, that's what I'll communicate. What I would also say is I have some liability concerns that if I were to be sharing confidential information, I mean, I have access to that, but only I do. So I have very bluntly told these parents, I am not risking, I always make it a joke. I'm like, I am not risking the law license that I will never pay off to give you information that I am not legally allowed to give you. This is confidential information. This is PHI. And so I dress it up as, HIPAA type language that we're all familiar with. But I basically say, I can tell you that they're doing well, that they're engaging in treatment. I can tell you certain things, but I'm not going to share medical records with you. This is a frequent request. I want to see their medical records. If I do not think that it is in my respondent's best interest because of the complications of the family, because what tends to manifest during these cases is it's quite clear that some of the mental illness that presents and the dysfunctions are, you kind of start seeing that they're getting it honestly, so to say.
Calling my client crazy.
I'm calling your client totally crazy. So, I mean, that has become very clear in almost every single one of these types of cases I've been involved with, that you have codependency issues, that you have a plethora of issues going on, even with the parent. And so at some point, I'm not going to risk my law license. So I have no ethical dilemma whatsoever. If they want to stop paying me, they can stop paying me.
Okay, I'm going to need to clarify that. Where I think the ethical dilemma comes in isn't about paying the conservator. It's when they say they're not going to pay for treatment for their child.
I understand.
Because then what is in their best interest? Is it in the best interest of that conservatee for them to now become indigent?
Fair.
Okay.
Okay, fair. Understood. She clear, all good. But I mean, I still, you know, regarding communicating with parents, this has been by far the hardest part of any concern. Everything else I can talk to other attorneys. What do you do with this? How do you handle this? What should I do to sell real property? All of that I learned by doing it. The thing that is always difficult, the most difficult, are the demands of family members to communicate regarding the respondent. Absolutely, hands down, the hardest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you've had a hard day, they're in a different time zone, they want to call you because they want an update because their son posted something weird on Facebook. Or one of my favorite cases, he liked to rap, and the rapping would involve very profane language, and that was embarrassing to the family. And you're exhausted and you've had a hell of a day, and all you want is, I don't know, to drink some wine and eat some cheese. And you find yourself, when you are mentally exhausted and emotionally exhausted, trying to maintain some degree of professionalism with a parent who wants to talk to you about a rap video on Facebook because they're embarrassed, and you just lose it. Or not, maybe.
Wait, is this the same one that wrote the song or the speech for Judge McClendon?
Possibly. We can neither confirm or deny those rumors.
No, it's actually not.
Oh, it's not the hit song?
No,
Okay.
I've had two aspiring musicians.
All right, thank you guys. Now, this next topic can be really difficult. If the respondent has a pet, how do you deal with trying to keep the respondent placed with the pet? And if that's not possible, have you ever taken a pet home with you? What do you do? I have.
I haven't dealt with this yet, thankfully, but I remember someone found a ferret and they had to figure out what to do with the ferret.
That was Mark King found a ferret, I think.
Yeah, well, back up. I'm referring to like cat, dog, not a raccoon you find in the hoarded home. I'm talking about.
It was
I have dealt with the raccoons in the home, the one I'm about to sell, where the family member told me not to go in without shoes, and they banged on the door to make sure all the animals came out first, which
nice.
that's the the
It's
animals.
really sad. I've had just basically begged. I have 2 dogs, and one of those dogs does not really like other dogs or my cat. So going home with another dog or cat is not really an option, and that would just lead down a pathway that I don't want to go down. So typically I just beg other family members, neighbors. I have a lady now on hospice. The neighbor's taken the dog. I've typically always found someone who would take the dog or the cat, because I think it's transference. I think they feel so guilty that they didn't do someone to help this person, and that me, a complete stranger, has to come in and take over, that they'll take the dog. And I totally play on that and make them take the animal. I have had to use animal control, though, will not come out if like people who live in less than desirable places and there's abandoned dogs, they will not do anything about it until someone is bitten. Do you know that?
No. Did not know that. I will tell you that in my very manipulative relationship-based way, I always try to be in the good graces of the East Nashville East Can. I always try to hang out with the animal rescue people. About once a year, I have to rely on them. So I do try to kind of always have one or two, you know, people in the hopper that I can call. I also have been in the situation where you just have to leave the animal in the home and try to care the best you can for the animal by letting them out. It's easier with a cat. Obviously, I got lucky the time I've had a cat that I just stopped in multiple times a week and dealt with. But the dogs are you just rely on those networks. And if you don't maintain a good, you know, solid relationship with dog rescue groups, get a friend that does, so you can have one phone call away. You know, East Can here in East Nashville is pretty amazing.
There are some facilities that will let you, depending on the level of disability or impairment of your ward. Some memory cares. There's a memory care in Lebanon that lets one of my ladies have a cat. I don't know if she remembers she has a cat. Or maybe she doesn't still have the cat, but there's a sign on the door saying don't let the cat out. And assisted livings, you can take a dog if it's a small dog. It just depends. Try and find your favorite assisted living, and I mean, beg, pretty much beg.
Yeah, they're never easy situations to home the dog while you're dealing with the family member. And typically the respondent, that animal has usually been their primary relationship. I mean, frankly, right, a lot of the time that has been the thing they are most concerned about, the thing they care the most about. And so talk about a way to earn their, you know, to know that they can trust you. Do right by their animal. Do the best you can to take care of the animal. And I think that speaks volumes for them about the type of person that's involved in their life now.
Shelley?
Yeah, I the only time that I have dealt with an animal was when I went to go visit a client in the hospital who kept talking about all the dogs that he had, and I never found them, couldn't find that he actually was living anywhere. So the only thing I've done is look into whether or not there actually were animals that needed to be taken care of, and I could never find that there were, but I have not yet dealt with that situation, thankfully.
Okay, the next topic I want to cover is placement and memory care, and how do you evaluate the level of placement that the client needs, and how do you work with the family if need be to explain that this is the best placement for your family member and that this is certainly at least based on their diagnosis and the doctor's recommendation. I'll start with you, Teresa.
Is it okay if I defer to Catherine? I think she has a lot more experience with this than I do. I'm not being lazy. She's far more experienced and will have a lot more information.
Okay, Catherine.
Thanks, Teresa. My answer is I don't, because I'm not a medical professional. I rely on the people who are qualified to make that diagnosis to do their job, and then I do my job, which is facilitation. By that, I mean, if you are working with someone who is in a hospital setting, you've got to rely on their social workers and caseworkers to do a workup that is appropriate. If you have a question about it, ask for a psych referral and or ask for them to do a mini mental exam or a MOCA, one of the tests to determine a level of dementia, and ask them to follow up on it again. But make sure you're relying on those professionals. And then once you've been doing this, it doesn't take very long for you to get a good network of people. The facilities that you use most often and that you have built a trust in, their director of nursing will go out and do an assessment, and they will let you know you can trust those people once you've built a relationship with them to know that they don't just want the money. And see what they have to say and whether or not an assisted living is more appropriate than a memory care unit. I think sometimes there is a tendency to put people, well, I've had it go both ways, put people in an assisted living when really they needed more help than that. And other times I've had wards who I didn't feel needed a memory care go into a memory care. But that's why I'm not qualified to make those decisions. And I wouldn't want to usurp that authority from those that can, because I'm simply not qualified to do it. Family will push back. If there is family and there's money, they will oftentimes push back. But remember why you've been appointed in the first place. Are they really pushing back because they don't believe their family member needs that level of care, or are they pushing back because they found out that it's going to cost $6,000 a month? And it's a very difficult conversation to have, but there's a lot of resources available. The nursing home's not going to take you home, which is obviously what we hear all the time. But one of my favorite words of caution there about placing someone is give them a minute. Give them a minute, because everyone has bad days or bad weeks, but just give them a minute. The hospital's trying to rush, get you out, get them out of that bed and get them placed. Give them a minute. Ask for that second referral. Ask for that repeat of the test. I had one lady, it was one of my very first conservatorships. And she went from Vanderbilt, who I think does a very good job with their diagnoses, and their case management is definitely second to none, I think. And they placed her, they said memory care, and we got her away at McHenry in the memory care unit. 25 days later, she is totally fine. She was just over medicating herself with over-the-counter medications. This woman was just a hot mess of medications. And once she cleared up, she was just fine. Thank God I hadn't sold her home or anything like that, but she was just fine. So just give them a minute. Anything
Kelly?
I agree with Catherine. When I get appointed as conservator, I'm relying on those doctors and nurses and the social workers for, what's their diagnosis, what level of care, and then it's the discussion of where they can go, where someone accepts them, and if they can afford it. And along that is figuring out, okay, you got to look in their assets at the same time. I've had ones where I was told there was all this money because the family kept talking about it, and then I realized there's next to nothing in a checking account, and you're then reevaluating and reassessing of what are the options. And it changes then too. I had one where the hospital was pushing to get him out for over a month. Then I finally got him placed at a facility, and he was pretty much independent there, fell the first night, ended up back in the hospital then, and is now at Tribeca and needs 24-hour care and needs all of that. So, the liability of that is very nerve-wracking, but to me, you're really relying on what those professionals tell you, because none of us are doctors. We don't know. We have to rely on them and rely on what they recommend based on their assessment. And so I really do rely on them, and then, figuring out what they can afford and where they can go, and helping and making sure the people at those facilities are helping you they're usually really, really wonderful of fill out this paperwork, or we've done all this, sign this, or here's where we'll go, we'll arrange the transfer and someone's going to call you to consent. And so like Catherine, I really rely on what those doctors, social workers, case managers, all of them tell you to do, because there's the ones that are the most helpful for all of it.
But try and only move them once, because every time you move someone who is in a fragile mental or physical state like this, it takes a toll. I'm sure there's scientific studies to back this up. It takes a toll every time you move him. And they say it takes an individual 30 days. Once you've moved someone into a facility, give them 30 days before you evaluate whether or not it's a successful placement. Because they may be kicking and screaming at first, but eventually no one likes change. It takes time to adjust to our new realities. And that, I think that applies universally. But try to only move them once.
Thank you, ladies. Okay, I'm going to start with Teresa on the next question. How do you deal with boundaries? What if a client's calling you 10 times a day? What if they want you to pick them up and take them to McDonald's? How do you deal with that? Do you transport your clients, or do you think that's a liability and you always hire a third party?
Whew. I like that you picked the one of us as like the worst at boundaries to ask the boundary question.
But you're in the car business now.
Because I have virtually no boundaries, but it's terrible. I've had to work on it. I think it's appropriate that you started with me, because when I first started this, I thought, oh, I'm going to do things. I'm going to be this badass that does things that no one else will do. And I'm going to pick these folks up and I'm going to fix everybody. I don't know. I had a huge martyr complex, which I totally own. And doing this work has just sort of like, first of all, amplified it, but then it made me fix it. So I'm grateful for the work for that. So to answer the question, I used to pick people up in my car. I picked up somebody from their home and dropped them off at MTMHI. Like, what was I thinking? I didn't want him to be stressed out. So I picked him up and drove him from West Nashville to Hermitage. Would I do that now? No, never. So the calls and the texts, and I actually, after this last case, I will no longer be texting with respondents. I will not be text messaging with respondents. They can call me during business hours, and they know that my phone number is a cell phone, and they know they can call me if there's an emergency. And by and large, even fairly mentally ill clients adhere to that. I think that, there is still something about us being attorneys that provides us some sort of, oh, I can't call my attorney on the weekend. So that has been a little bit helpful to be a little more sort of in your face about how I'm an attorney, which I never would have done prior to that, because I really wanted it to be much more like relationship based. But that has behooved me to create better boundaries with people, to sort of function in a way where they see me more as a professional as opposed to their best friend. And definitely, I would never advise putting people in my vehicle now, not ever. Generally, we don't have to deal with that with people in a facility. A lot of times, even if you take them to a doctor's appointment, they're transported. But so like the types of individuals that we've brought up before, the younger folks with mental illness and their families want, a lot of times what's very evident in those cases particularly is that the family almost wants you to serve as a friend to their child, who they view as not having a fulfilled social life, or they're very concerned that their child is lonely. That has been an odd situation, and I will meet people out at restaurants, but I don't drive. I won't pick them up and take them to the restaurants anymore. I'm not going to put myself in that position, but I will have lunch with the respondents a lot on when I can do it. So is that boundaries are extremely difficult in these cases, because the only way to sort of maneuver through the entire case is to have a good relationship and a good rapport with your conservatee. And I put a lot of time and effort into my relationships with the people. Facility type folks are much easier than the types of cases that we kind of keep referring to, the 30-year-old mentally ill folk with wealthy parents. Sorry, Michelle, that's the best I can do. I think that boundaries are extremely hard, but just creating a persona, being an attorney, even in these conservatorships, is very helpful.
That's a great response. We had a question. Do you file a notice of conservatorship with Register of Deeds if the conservator owns real property? I will often file the order appointing the conservator and the letter of conservatorship. And if I have a judgment against a family member, I will file that judgment order. And I also write a letter to all 3 credit bureaus with a copy of the order and the LOC if that person has any capability at all of trying to obtain additional credit. Do you guys want to comment on that question real quick?
That's great. I didn't ever think about that. That's great to write to the credit bureaus.
And I don't do that necessarily if they're, long-term care bedridden, but if they're
Right.
still functioning and they have a history of bad financial decisions, yes, I will send all, and that'll flag their credit reports. They generally can't get additional credit.
I have never filed a notice of conservatorship at the Register of Deeds. I hear you saying that you do that, Michelle, but I also own a title company and I do perform title searches myself. And I can envision a situation where a title company might have that might raise some questions. So all I would say to that, I'm not saying it's bad. I think it's great. It's fine. I don't think it does any harm. I think that it would matter if you if you think that there's any risk that somebody's gonna try to sell the property or do anything using an affidavit of heirship. I think, I don't know. I typically in real property cases, my folks have 0 people, like there is no one. So I haven't had to think that through, but I can imagine situations where that would be advisable.
And we try to send a notice of address change so that the trustee now sends the tax bill to the conservator, not, and that, guys, Catherine and I had a foreclosure case together in which the foreclosure notice got sent to the decedent. So the conservator did not know. We had to stop a foreclosure. So that can get really tricky. If you get real property, that you need to just immediately take action because it can cause all sorts of problems. And the reason I file it is I feel like when the title search is performed, at least it's something that the title attorney is going to put in their opinion letter, this order.
Agreed. I agree.
I'm not saying it clouds the title, but it certainly raises a red flag.
I agree. I think it's great practice if you think someone's going to swoop in and try to do something weird. Sure.
This is the last thing, real quickly, any opinions on burial? And if, the respondent doesn't have funds for burial and you're looking at cremation, how do you deal with the family when they are adamantly opposed to?
Tell them how much it costs. Tell them how much it costs and tell them if they're going to pay for it, you'll sign off on it. It typically works.
And I explained, sort of either we can deal with this now together or your loved one might have to be dealing with the metro
Indigent.
all of the metro indigent stuff. And they'll usually say, well, at least I can be driving the train a little bit through a cremation process, even though they had hoped for a big burial. I mean, it's just not feasible for most people to pay $5,000 for a funeral or,
Yeah.
I mean, really.
I'd like to say about boundaries quickly. This is hard. This job is hard. Everyone points their fingers at you. Britney Spears hasn't helped. I mean, I feel bad for Britney Spears, and I'm glad she is now free to spin away on Instagram. Great. Everyone thinks you're the bad guy. It's a very, very, very rewarding job. More so than any other aspect of my practice for me is getting someone who lived in squalor and misery and getting them set up, and they are just thrilled. And it's very rewarding, but also there are so many people pointing fingers at you. Everybody, their entire families who haven't done anything, they are all pointing their finger at you. They are all telling you that you are doing it wrong, that they could do it better. The liability is huge, the exposure is huge, and then you get attached to these people and they die. And it's heartbreaking. So boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. This is a hard, hard job. Show yourself some grace. And that's it.
Thank you guys so much. Just one quick note. If you're going to serve as conservator, trustee, guardian, look at your malpractice policy and make sure you have dual coverage. Thank you guys so much. And
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to Amy. I think it's break time.